The scream tore through the Arizona desert like a bullet through flesh. Mason Reed's hand froze on his rifle as he watched the woman stumble into view, her dress torn blood streaming down her face, clutching a white cloth to her chest like it held her very soul. "Please," she gasped, collapsing at his feet. "Don't take it. Whatever you do, don't take the cloth." Behind her, the thunder of hooves grew closer, Clayton Mercer's men, and Mason knew in that moment his years of hiding were over. My friend, what you're about to hear is a story of redemption written in blood and courage. Stay with me until the end and don't forget to comment your city below. I want to know how far this tale of justice has traveled. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Arizona hills as Mason Reed checked his traps along Willow Creek. 3 years he'd lived in this cabin, 3 years since he'd spoken more than a dozen words to another living soul. The isolation suited him fine, better than fine it was necessary. Some men weren't meant to walk among the civilized anymore, and Mason had accepted that truth the day he'd buried his uniform along with the memories of what happened at the first Willow Creek, the one back in Missouri. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, resetting the snares, checking for tracks. A rabbit here, maybe a deer if he was lucky. Simple work for simple needs. No complications. No decisions that ended with mothers clutching dead children, no orders that turned good men into monsters. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the morning stillness. Mason's body reacted before his mind could process dropping low behind a boulder, his Winchester already in his hands. Old habits died hard, and some never died at all. He waited, counting heartbeats, listening. Another shot, this one followed by shouting men's voices, harsh and commanding. Then came the scream. It was a woman's voice, high and desperate, cutting through the desert air like a blade. Mason's jaw clenched. Not his problem. Whatever was happening down in the valley, it wasn't his concern. He'd learned the hard way what happened when you tried to play hero. Heroes got people killed. Heroes created orphans and widows. Heroes. The scream came again, closer this time, and with it the sound of horses. Multiple riders moving fast through the canyon below. "Damn it all to hell," Mason muttered, already moving. He kept low, using the rocks and scrub brush for cover as he worked his way toward the commotion. 20 years of military training guided his movements, heel-to-toe weight, distributed rifle held loose but ready. The sounds grew clearer, 3, maybe 4 riders, their horses laboring up the steep trail that wound toward his cabin. Through a gap in the rocks he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 25, her blue dress torn and muddy blonde hair streaming wild behind her as she ran. Blood ran from a gash on her forehead, and her left arm hung at an awkward angle, but she kept moving, scrambling over rocks with desperate determination. In her right hand, pressed tight against her chest, she clutched something white, a cloth or bundle of some kind. Behind her, 4 riders pushed their mounts hard up the trail. Mason recognized the type, immediately hired guns, the kind of men who did ugly work for wealthy employers, and asked no questions as long as the pay was good. Their leader, a mountain of a man with a black beard and cruel eyes, had his rope out, spinning it lazily, like he was in no particular hurry. "Come on back, little rabbit," the bearded man called out, his voice carrying a disturbing cheerfulness. "Mr. Mercer just wants to talk. You're making this harder than it needs to be." The woman stumbled, went down hard on her knees, but pushed herself back up immediately. She was heading straight toward Mason's position, though she couldn't know he was there. In another 30 seconds, she'd run right into him. Mason could slip away. These men hadn't seen him, didn't know he existed. He could fade back into the hills, let them pass, and maintain his carefully constructed isolation. It was the smart play, the safe play. The woman was already lost, wounded, exhausted, outnumbered. Getting involved would only add his name to the casualty list. The woman stumbled again, and this time when she rose, Mason saw her face clearly. Tears had carved clean tracks through the dirt and blood, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination he recognized. It was the look of someone who'd rather die than surrender, someone protecting something worth more than their own life. "Please, she gasped, though she couldn't know anyone was listening. "Please, God, anyone, but help me." The lead rider spurred his horse forward, closing the distance. "Blackwood's going to have fun with you when we get back." He laughed. "Should have just given us the ledger page, girl. Now you're going to learn what happens when you steal from Clayton Mercer." Ledger page. Mason's mind filed the information away automatically. The woman had taken something evidence of some kind. That explained the desperation on both sides. She was running with something that could hurt Mercer, and these men had been sent to retrieve it at any cost. The woman crested the rise and her eyes met Mason's. For a heartbeat, neither moved. She stood there swaying on her feet, blood dripping steadily from her wounds, that white cloth still pressed against her chest. Her lips formed a single word, please. Mason made his choice. Get behind me, he said quietly, stepping out from cover, rifle raised. The riders pulled up short horses, dancing nervously as 4 guns swung toward him. The bearded leader, Blackwood, apparently studied Mason with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating a rival. Well, well, Blackwood said. What do we have here? Some old hermit playing hero. He shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his pistol. This ain't your concern, old man. We're here on Mr. Mercer's business, and you'd be wise to step aside. The lady seems to disagree, Mason replied, keeping his voice level. The Winchester felt familiar in his hands. An old friend returned. Looks to me like she'd prefer you boys turn around and ride on back where you came from. One of the younger riders laughed. 4 against 1, you senile fool. You even know which end of that rifle to point. Mason didn't respond, didn't need to. He'd learned long ago that men who talk too much in situations like this were trying to convince themselves more than anyone else. His stance, his grip, the way he'd positioned himself with the sun at his back, professionals would recognize the signs. Blackwood did. You're military? Blackwood said, eyes narrowing. Or were. That bearing that stance. Let me guess, Union. You got that self-righteous stink about you. War's been over 20 years, Mason said. Doesn't matter what I was. Maybe not to you. Blackwood spat tobacco juice into the dirt. But Mr. Mercer, he's got a long memory, especially for Union boys who don't mind their own business. He gestured to the woman who'd collapsed behind Mason, still clutching her bundle. That one there stole from him, took something that weren't hers to take. We're just here to retrieve property and have a conversation with the thief. Conversation, Mason repeated. That why she's bleeding. That your idea of talking, sometimes conversations get animated. Blackwood's hand inched closer to his gun. Last chance, old man. Walk away. This ain't your fight. The woman stirred behind him, her voice weak but urgent. They killed them, she whispered. At the mine. Women, children. They killed them all when they tried to escape. I have proof. Don't let them. Shut your mouth, whore! Blackwood snarled, and his hand went for his gun. Mason had been waiting for it. The Winchester spoke once, and Blackwood's pistol went spinning into the rocks along with 2 of his fingers. The big man screamed, clutching his mangled hand, and his horse reared in panic. Nobody else needs to bleed today, Mason said, working the lever to chamber another round, smooth as breathing. Take your boss and ride out. Tell Mercer his business ends here. The 3 younger gunmen had frozen hands on their weapons, but not drawing. They looked between their wounded leader and Mason, calculating odds. One of them, barely out of his teens, was sweating despite the morning chill. You just signed your death warrant, Blackwood gasped through gritted teeth, blood seeping between the fingers of his good hand as he tried to stem the flow from his wounded one. Clayton Mercer owns this territory. Every lawman, every judge, I said ride out. Mason's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd given orders in battle, who'd sent men to die and lived with the consequences. Boy, he addressed the youngest rider, tie off his hand before he bleeds out, use his belt for a tourniquet, then get him to a doctor. The young man looked to the others for guidance, found none, and dismounted to help Blackwood. As he worked, Blackwood's eyes never left Mason's face. This ain't over, he promised. You don't know who you're crossing. Mercer's got an army. He'll burn you out, hurt everyone you ever... I don't have anyone. Mason cut him off. That's what makes me dangerous. Now, get out of here before I decide leaving witnesses is a mistake. It took them 5 minutes to get Blackwood back on his horse, his hand wrapped in a torn shirt, face gray with pain and rage. The youngest rider had to lead his horse while another kept him steady in the saddle. As they turned to leave, Blackwood managed one last threat. The girl dies slow, he said. And you'll watch. That's a promise from Clayton Mercer himself. Mason said nothing. just kept the rifle trained on them until they disappeared down the trail. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded completely did he lower the weapon and turn to the woman. She'd passed out curled on her side, but her fingers still clutched that white cloth like her life depended on it. Up close, Mason could see the brand on her shoulder through the torn dress, C.M. Clayton Mercer's mark. The same brand he'd seen on cattle, now burned into human flesh. His stomach turned. "Let's get you inside," he said, though she couldn't hear him. He lifted her carefully, noting how little she weighed, how young she looked beneath the dirt and blood. The white cloth came loose as he adjusted his grip, and he glimpsed what she'd been protecting, a folded page covered in cramped handwriting columns of numbers' names. A ledger page, just as Blackwood had said. The woman stirred her eyes, flying open in panic. "No," she gasped, trying to grab the cloth. "Please, don't take it. Promise me, whatever happens, don't let them have it." "Easy," Mason said, pressing the bundle back into her hands. "It's safe. You're safe. Let's get you patched up." "You don't understand," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The children, they're killing the children at the mine. This shows." She faded again, exhaustion finally claiming her. Mason carried her into his cabin, his mind already working through the implications. Clayton Mercer. He knew that name. Everyone in the territory knew it. Mining baron cattle king man who owned judges and sheriffs like playing cards. If this woman had evidence of crimes, real evidence, then he'd just put himself between one of the most powerful men in Arizona and something that could destroy him. "Should have minded your own business, Reed, Ann," he muttered to himself, laying the woman on his bed. But even as he said it, he knew he'd had no choice. Not really. Some things a man couldn't walk away from and still call himself a man. He fetched water and clean cloth, began cleaning her wounds with practiced efficiency. The gash on her head would need stitches. Her arm was dislocated but not broken, and she had bruises in the shape of hands around her throat. Someone had tried to strangle her. The brand on her shoulder was infected, probably a week old from the look of it. As he worked, she mumbled in her delirium, names, places, fragments of horror. "Eagle Crest Mine," she whispered. "Locked them in. When the cave-in started, children screaming, had to get proof, had to—" Mason's hand stilled. Children locked in during a cave-in. His mind flew back 20 years to another place, another time when he'd followed orders that resulted in children screaming. Willow Creek, Missouri. The raid that had ended his military career, not officially, but in every way that mattered. He'd been following orders then, too, told the intel was good that the farmhouse held Confederate supplies. Instead, they'd found families, women and children hidden in the root cellar while their men fought elsewhere. The fire had spread so fast. He shook his head, forcing himself back to the present. That was done couldn't be undone. But this, whatever was happening at Mercer's mine, this could still be stopped. The woman's eyes opened again as he was stitching the gash on her forehead. She didn't cry out, just watched him with those fierce blue eyes. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to distract her from the pain. "Eleanor," she whispered. "Eleanor Hayes, you, Mason Reed. Why did you help me? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." Mason tied off the stitch, considered his answer. "Maybe because I've spent 3 years not helping anyone. Maybe it was time." Eleanor studied his face. "You're military. The way you handled that rifle. Were you at Antietam, Gettysburg?" "Different battles, Mum," Mason said quietly. "Smaller ones. The kind nobody writes songs about." "My mother was at Willow Creek, Eleanor said suddenly, and Mason's blood went cold. "In Missouri. She was trying to get my sister and me to safety when the Union soldiers came. She hid us in the creek bed, told us not to come out no matter what we heard." Tears ran down her face. "I was 5. My sister was 3. We stayed hidden while they burned everything, while people screamed." Mason's hands trembled as he packed away his medical supplies. Of all the people in all the territory, he'd saved a survivor of Willow Creek. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. "I'm sorry," he said, the words pathetically inadequate. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family." Eleanor's hand found his surprisingly strong. "You weren't there. You didn't do it. If only that were true, Mason thought, but said nothing. This ledger page, Eleanor continued, it's from Mercer's private books. Shows everything the people he's enslaved at Eagle Crest Mine, the ones who've died, the children born there, who've never seen freedom. He brands them like cattle Mr. Reed, works them until they die, then throws their bodies in unmarked graves. I was his personal property for 2 years before I escaped. How did you get the ledger? A bitter smile crossed her face. I learned to be invisible to clean his office while he conducted his business to be furniture he didn't notice. He got careless, left his safe open one day while dealing with some problem at the mine. I saw the books, saw what they contained. Took me 3 weeks to get back in to tear out pages that would prove what he's doing. I only managed one before his men caught me. One might be enough if we can get it to the right people. Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. The right people, Mr. Reed Clayton Mercer owns the right people. The sheriff is his cousin. The territorial judge dines at his table. The newspaper editor prints what Mercer tells him to print. There are no right people. Then we make some, Mason said. There's always someone who can't be bought. Always someone who'll stand up when pushed hard enough. You don't know him, Eleanor whispered. Clayton Mercer was a Confederate Colonel, Mr. Reed. He never accepted that the war ended. Never accepted that he lost. He's building his own kingdom out here with his own slaves, his own army. The mine isn't just about silver. It's about power. About proving that his way, the old way, can still exist. Mason felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. A Confederate colonel with a private empire enslaving people in defiance of every law and principle the Union had fought for. And now Mason, a Union soldier with ghosts of his own standing in his way. How many people at the mine? He asked. Last count 187. Men, women, children. Some taken for debts, real or invented. Some just disappeared from the roads, especially Indians and Mexicans people. Mercer figures won't be missed. Others are war refugees, people with no family to ask questions. And the law does nothing. The law is what Mercer says it is. Eleanor struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain. But there's more, Mr. Reed. I heard him talking with Blackwood. They're planning to move everyone to seal the played-out sections of the mine with the workers inside. Make them all disappear, start fresh somewhere else. It's supposed to happen in 3 days. 3 days? Mason repeated. 187 lives, 3 days to save them. It was impossible. It was insane. It was a chance for redemption he'd never thought he'd have. I need to get to Prescott, Eleanor said. There's a federal marshal there, Samuel Carter. He's new, just arrived from Washington. Mercer doesn't own him yet. If I can get this ledger page to him. You're not going anywhere for at least a week, Mason said firmly. That arm needs to heal, and you've lost too much blood. Besides, Mercer's men will be watching the roads. Then those people die. Eleanor's voice rose in desperation. You don't understand, I promised them. I told them I'd get help, that I'd... She broke off coughing, and Mason saw blood on her lips. Easy, he said, easing her back down. We'll find another way. There is no other way, and why do you care anyway? This isn't your fight. Mason was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the harsh beauty of the desert. Maybe it's been my fight for 20 years, he said finally. I just didn't know it until now. He made her rest, then gave her some laudanum for the pain despite her protests. As she drifted off, she pressed the white cloth with its precious cargo into his hands. If something happens to me, she whispered, promise you'll get this to someone who can use it. Promise me those people won't die for nothing. I promise, Mason said, and meant it. As Eleanor slept, he examined the ledger page by lamplight. It was damning columns of names, dates of acquisition work assignments, deaths. Everything annotated in a careful hand, probably Mercer's bookkeeper. The kind of evidence that would see a man hanged if the man wasn't Clayton Mercer. Mason set the page aside and walked out onto his porch. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. Somewhere out there, Blackwood was reporting back to Mercer, telling him about the old soldier who'd interfered. They'd be coming probably tomorrow, definitely with more men. The smart play was to run. Take Eleanor and disappear into the mountains, let Mercer's plans proceed live to fight another day. It's what he'd been doing for 3 years, running, hiding, avoiding the world and its problems. But those 187 people didn't have the luxury of running. They were counting on a young woman who'd risked everything to save them, and now she was counting on him. Mason walked back inside and pulled his trunk from beneath the bed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the things he'd sworn never to touch again. His service revolver cleaned and loaded. His cavalry saber sharp as the day it was issued. And at the bottom, folded carefully, his uniform. Not the whole thing, he'd burned most of it, but the coat with its captain's insignia, kept for reasons he couldn't articulate. He didn't put them on, not yet, but having them close made him feel more like himself. Or rather like the man he'd been before Willow Creek broke something inside him. Eleanor stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about her mother. Mason sat in the chair beside the bed, keeping watch. He'd failed to save the innocents at Willow Creek 20 years ago. Perhaps that's what all the running had been about, running from the chance to fail again. But you couldn't run forever. Eventually the past circled back around, offering you a chance to face it properly. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. The desert coming alive with night hunters. Tomorrow, Mercer's hunters would come, and Mason would be ready for them. But tonight he kept vigil over a brave young woman who'd refused to let evil go unchallenged, who'd risked everything for strangers who had no one else. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered to the sleeping Eleanor, and wondered if somewhere, somehow, the ghosts of Willow Creek were watching. The night deepened, and Mason began to plan. 187 people, 3 days, and an army of hired killers standing in the way. He'd faced worse odds in the war, though, never with stakes quite like these. This wasn't about territory or politics or abstract principles. This was about people in chains, children who'd never known freedom, families torn apart by one man's greed and cruelty. He thought about the brand on Eleanor's shoulder, the casual evil of marking a human being like livestock. Thought about Mercer, a Confederate colonel, who'd never accepted defeat, building his own twisted version of the Old South in the Arizona desert. The war hadn't ended for men like Mercer. They just found new battlefields, new ways to fight it. Well, Mason thought grimly, checking the loads in his rifle, maybe it was time someone reminded Mercer that he'd lost that war. And if it cost Mason his life to do it, at least it would be a death with meaning, not the slow fade into nothing he'd been living for 3 years. Eleanor woke near midnight, fever-bright and disoriented. Mason gave her water, checked her wounds, tried to keep her calm as she relived fragments of her escape from Mercer's compound. "He was going to sell me," she said, her voice distant and horrified, "to a man in Mexico who collects unusual women. That's what Mercer called me, unusual, because I could read, because I fought back." She laughed bitterly. "He said I needed to learn my place, that the brand would remind me I was property. But brands can be overcome, Mr. Reed. It's the chains in people's minds that are hardest to break." "You broke yours," Mason said. "Did I? I still wake up thinking I'm there, that this is the dream, and that's the reality. I still feel the brand burning sometimes, like it's fresh." She touched her shoulder unconsciously. "Do you have scars, Mr. Reed? The kind that never really heal?" Mason thought of Willow Creek, of the children's voices he still heard sometimes in his dreams. "Yes," he said simply. "Then you understand why I had to try. Even if I died, even if I failed, I had to try. Living with the knowledge and doing nothing. That would have been worse than death." "You didn't fail," Mason assured her. "We're going to get those people out." Eleanor studied his face in the lamplight. "You've already decided, haven't you? You're going to fight them." "It's what I should have done 3 years ago," Mason said. "Should have fought the right battles instead of hiding from the wrong ones." "What happened 3 years ago?" Mason was quiet for a long time. Part of him wanted to tell her, to confess to the survivor of Willow Creek exactly who she was trusting with her life. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. "I lost my way," he said finally. "Made choices that haunted me. Been trying to find my way back ever since." Eleanor reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small but strong, calloused from hard work. "Maybe we can find it together," she said. They sat like that for a while, two damaged souls in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, holding onto each other like anchors in a storm. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the windows, bringing the smell of sage and distant rain. "Tell me about the mine," Mason said eventually. "Everything you know. Lay out guards' routines." Eleanor closed her eyes, organizing her thoughts. It's built into a canyon, only one way in by road. The main shaft goes straight back into the mountain with side tunnels branching off. The older sections, the ones they plan to seal, are deeper in. That's where they keep the workers at night behind iron gates. During the day, they work the active veins under guard. How many guards, quote? Usually 20 on site, more at the compound where Mercer lives. Blackwood commands them. Or did. She smiled grimly. You probably made an enemy there. How are the workers organized? Families are kept together mostly. Mercer learned early that separating families made people desperate, unpredictable. Keep them together, and you can control them through fear for their loved ones. There are about 40 children, Mr. Reed. The youngest is 2 years old, born in the mine. She's never seen anything but those tunnels. Mason's jaw clenched. Guards watch the children. Always. They're the leverage. Any worker causes trouble, threatens to hurt their child. It's effective. And in 3 days, they all disappear. Eleanor nodded. Mercer's been gradually moving his operation to a new site, 50 miles south. Once that's ready, he'll seal the old mine with everyone inside, claim there was an accident, a cave-in. Who's going to dig through tons of rock to check? And even if they did, he owns the investigators. Mason stood and paced, his mind working through possibilities. The federal marshal you mentioned, Carter, you're sure he's clean? As sure as I can be. He arrested one of Mercer's men last month for murdering a Mexican farmer despite pressure to let it go. Mercer's been trying to buy him or run him off ever since. Then we need to get word to him. But you're right, the roads will be watched. Mason stopped pacing, an idea forming. Unless we don't use the roads. What do you mean? I have a friend, Mason said slowly. Thomas Running Elk Apache. His people know every trail, every hidden path in these mountains. If anyone can get a message through unseen, it's him, the Apache. But Mercer's men hunt them for sport. They'd never... Thomas owes me a debt, Mason interrupted. More importantly, he hates Mercer as much as you do. Mercer's men killed his brother last winter, claimed he was stealing cattle. He wasn't. Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes. You think he'd help? I think he'd relish the chance, but getting word to the marshal is only part of it. Even with federal authority, Carter would need men to take the mine, and most of the local law is in Mercer's pocket. Then what do we do? Mason smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. We give people a reason to choose sides. That ledger page you stole, we make copies, spread them around, let everyone see what Mercer really is. Some folks might surprise you when push comes to shove. There's always someone who'll stand up. You have a lot of faith in people, Mr. Reed. No, Mason said quietly. But I have faith in conscience. Most people have one, even if they've buried it deep. Show them children in chains, and that conscience starts clawing its way back up. Eleanor was fading again, exhaustion overtaking her despite her efforts to stay alert. Mason helped her lie back down, adjusted the blankets. Rest, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. They'll come for us, she murmured. Mercer won't let this stand. I'm counting on it, Mason said. As Eleanor drifted back to sleep, Mason returned to his vigil. He cleaned his weapons, counted ammunition, prepared for what was coming. But his mind kept drifting to those 187 souls in the mine, especially the children. A 2-year-old who'd never seen the sky, families held together by terror. It was an evil so profound it made his own sin seem almost petty by comparison. Almost. The ghosts of Willow Creek would never leave him, he knew that now, but perhaps they could be appeased. Perhaps saving these children could balance the cosmic scales just a little. It wouldn't bring back the dead, wouldn't undo what was done, but it would mean their deaths led to something other than just his torment. Near dawn, Mason heard what he'd been waiting for, the soft whistle of a desert wren. Except wrens didn't sing at this hour. He stepped onto the porch, hands visible but near his weapons. Thomas Running Elk materialized from the shadows like smoke given form. He was tall for an Apache, lean and weathered with eyes that missed nothing. They'd met 2 years ago when Mason had found him wounded, shot by cattle rustlers who'd left him to die. Mason had patched him up, shared his food and shelter until Thomas could travel. They'd developed an odd friendship built on mutual respect and shared solitude. You have trouble coming, Thomas said without preamble. Mercer's men, many of them, They make camp 5 miles south, wait for dawn. How many? 15, maybe 20. They bring chains. Thomas's eyes flicked to the cabin. The woman she lives. Good. She is known to my people. She helped my cousin's child when the boy was sick, gave medicine when the white doctor wouldn't come. We remember such things. Mason made a decision. I need your help, Thomas. Not just for her, for many others. He explained quickly about the mine, the enslaved workers, Mercer's plan. Thomas's face darkened with each word. We know of this place, he said when Mason finished. Some of our people have disappeared near there. We thought them dead. They might be among the workers. Will your people help? Thomas was quiet for a moment. To fight Mercer is to fight the white man's law. It will bring soldiers, perhaps. The law is already against Mercer. He just owns the local enforcement. We get word to the federal marshal, show him proof, and this becomes legal. Your people would be heroes, not outlaws. Heroes? Thomas repeated, his tone skeptical. Apache heroes in white men's stories? That would be new. He paused. But for the children, for our people who might be in that mine, yes, we will help. Can you get a message to Prescott without being seen? My nephew rides like the wind itself. Give me your message. Mason went inside and carefully copied the key parts of the ledger, adding his own testimony about what he'd witnessed. He sealed it with wax and addressed it to Federal Marshal Samuel Carter. Tell your nephew to put this directly in Carter's hands, no one else's. And Thomas, in 2 days, can your people be ready to fight if needed? We are always ready to fight. The question is whether your people are ready to fight alongside Apache. My people are whoever stands against evil, Mason said. I don't care what color they are or what language they speak. Thomas took the message and vanished back into the desert as quickly as he'd come. Mason watched the horizon lighten, knowing that within hours Mercer's men would attack. He'd bought time by forcing them to wait for reinforcements, but now that time was up. He went back inside to find Eleanor awake, trying to sit up despite obvious pain. I heard voices, she said. Friend of mine. The message is on its way to the marshal. He helped her to a chair. Can you handle a gun? My father taught me to shoot before he died. Why? Because they're coming and I'd feel better if you were armed. Eleanor's face paled, but her jaw set firmly. Give me a weapon. Mason handed her his service revolver, showed her how to check the loads. If things go bad, you take the horse out back and ride for Thomas's people. They'll protect you. And leave you to fight alone? I don't think so, Mr. Reed. This is my fight now. No, Eleanor said firmly. It became our fight the moment you stepped between me and them. We stand together or not at all. Before Mason could argue, he heard the sound he'd been dreading, hoofbeats, many of them coming up the trail. He moved to the window, counted riders. 22 men, Blackwood at their head, despite his bandaged hand. They'd brought a wagon, too, with chains in the back, just as Thomas had said. They're not even trying to hide their intentions, Eleanor said, looking over his shoulder. Mercer's arrogance. He thinks he owns this territory so completely that he doesn't need subtlety. Mason checked his rifle. Stay back from the windows, if shooting starts. I know what to do in a fight, Mr. Reed. The question is, do you have a plan beyond standing here and shooting until they kill us? Mason smiled grimly. Actually, I do. You're going to hate it. Why? Because it involves you being bait. Before Eleanor could respond, Blackwood's voice boomed across the morning air. Reed, Mason, Reed. Come on out and bring the woman. Mr. Mercer wants to have a word. Mercer's not here, Mason called back. No, but his message is, you give us the girl and the ledger page, you can live. Keep being stubborn and we'll burn you out and take them anyway. Counter offer, Mason shouted. You turn around and ride away, and I don't kill any more of you. Several of the riders laughed. Blackwood didn't. You got lucky yesterday, Reed. Today's different. Today, you're outnumbered 20-1. Your math's off, Mason said. Eleanor counts too, and she's worth at least 5 of your hired thugs. Brave words from a man about to die. I've been about to die since 1861, Mason replied. Gets less scary each time. There was murmuring among the riders. Some of them were having second thoughts about facing a man who spoke so casually about death. Blackwood sensed it and raised his voice. $50 bonus to the man who brings me Reed's Head 100 if you take him alive so Mr. Mercer can deal with him personal. That changed the mathematics. Mason saw several riders dismount, taking cover behind rocks and preparing for an assault. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I need you to do exactly what I say." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the revolver as Mason outlined his plan in hurried whispers. Through the window, she could see Blackwood's men spreading out, taking positions that would let them rush the cabin from multiple angles. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert, and each shadow might hide a man with a gun. "You want me to what?" she hissed, disbelief coloring her voice, despite her effort to keep quiet. "Show yourself at the window just for a second. Let them see you're here, that you're wounded. Men like these, they get overconfident when they think their prey is weak." Mason was already moving, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. "While they're focused on you, I'll slip out the back. And leave me here alone. For 5 minutes, maybe less. I know this terrain better than they do. There's a ridge behind the cabin that gives a clear line of sight to their positions. I can pin them down, force them to divide their attention." He pressed a box of ammunition into her hands. "You just need to keep them talking. Keep them thinking we're both still inside." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she could see the tactical sense in it. Still, the thought of facing 20 men alone, even for a few minutes, made her stomach clench. She thought of the mine of the children counting on her and steeled herself. "Fine," she said, "but if you get yourself killed out there, I'll never forgive you." Mason actually smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Noted. When I start shooting, you get down and stay down. The walls are thick adobe. They'll stop most bullets." Blackwood's voice rang out again. "Running out of patience here, Reed. You got 1 minute to show yourself, or we start shooting?" Mason squeezed Eleanor's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance that somehow meant more than words could have. Then he was gone, slipping out the back door silent as smoke. Eleanor moved to the window, took a deep breath, and showed herself for just a heartbeat before ducking back. The reaction was immediate. "There she is!" one of the men shouted. "The bitch is still alive!" "Of course she's alive, you idiot," Blackwood snarled. "Mr. Mercer wants her that way. Reed, your minute's up. What's it going to be?" Eleanor pitched her voice to sound weaker than she felt. "Mr. Reed is hurt. You shot him yesterday. He's bleeding bad. Please, just let us be." She heard laughter from several of the men. Blackwood's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Well, now that changes things. Boys, looks like the old soldier ain't as tough as he pretended. Move in slow, keep your guns ready." Eleanor watched through a crack in the shutters as 5 men broke from cover, approaching the cabin in a crouch. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Where was Mason? Had something happened to him? The lead man was only 30 feet away now, close enough that she could see the tobacco stains on his teeth, when he grinned. The shot came from the ridge like thunder. The grinning man spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Before anyone could react, Mason fired again, and another man went down. The remaining 3 dove for cover, shouting curses in confusion. "It's a trick," Blackwood roared. "He's on the ridge. Martinez, take 5 men and flank him. Everyone else rush the cabin. The girl's alone in there." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. This wasn't part of the plan. Mason couldn't fight off a flanking party and cover the cabin at the same time. She checked the revolver's loads, moved to a better position where she could cover the door. Her arm throbbed where it had been dislocated, but she ignored the pain. Pain was for later, for surviving. The front door exploded inward under the boot of a massive man with a scarred face. Eleanor didn't hesitate. The revolver bucked in her hand, and the man staggered back, looking down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his chest before toppling backward. "The bitch has a gun!" someone shouted. Eleanor fired again, the bullet splintering the doorframe inches from another man's head. He jerked back, cursing. From the ridge, Mason's rifle cracked steadily, keeping up a rhythm that spoke of long practice. But she could hear shooting from the other side of the ridge, too. The flanking party had found him. A window shattered on her left. She spun, fired at the shape appearing there, missed. The man's pistol was coming up, aimed at her head, when another shot rang out. Not from the ridge, but from somewhere else entirely. The man at the window pitched forward a hole between his shoulder blades. Thomas Running Elk appeared in the broken window like a ghost, a smoking rifle in his hands. Behind him, Eleanor glimpsed other Apache warriors moving through the rocks with deadly grace. "Stay down, woman," Thomas said calmly, then vanished again. The tide of battle shifted in an instant. Blackwood's men, thinking they were fighting one old soldier and a wounded woman, suddenly found themselves caught between Mason's rifle, Eleanor's revolver, and an unknown number of Apache warriors who seemed to materialize from the desert itself. Panic spread through their ranks like wildfire. "Apache!" someone screamed. "It's a damn Apache war party!" "Stand your ground!" Blackwood bellowed, but his men were already breaking. The Apache had a reputation that transcended reality, built on decades of warfare and whispered stories. Most of these hired guns had never actually fought Apache warriors. Now faced with the real thing, their courage evaporated. Eleanor watched through the window as men threw down their weapons and ran for their horses. Some made it. Others found themselves facing Apache warriors who rose from concealment like the desert had come alive. The fighting was brief but vicious. When the dust settled, 8 of Blackwood's men lay dead or wounded, and the rest were in full retreat. Blackwood himself stood in the middle of the carnage, his good hand on his pistol, his bandaged hand hanging useless at his side. His eyes burned with rage as he looked at the cabin. "This ain't over," he shouted. "You hear me? Reed Mercer's going to burn this whole territory to find you. Every Apache, every Mexican, everyone who helped you dies screaming." Mason appeared on the trail, walking down from the ridge with his rifle held casual but ready. Blood ran from a graze on his cheek, and his shirt was torn where a bullet had come too close, but he moved with the same steady purpose Eleanor had first witnessed. "Tell Mercer I'll be coming for him," Mason said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Tell him the mine at Eagle Crest has 3 days. After that, every soul he's enslaved goes free, or I personally put him in the ground." "You're one man," Blackwood spat. "Mercer has an army." "Had an army," Thomas Running Elk corrected, appearing beside Mason. Several Apache warriors flanked him, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready. "8 of your men are dead. 4 more won't fight again. The rest run like rabbits. This army—" Blackwood's face went purple with rage and humiliation. He looked around at his remaining men, saw fear in their eyes, and knew he'd lost more than just a skirmish. He'd lost their confidence. "Mount up," he told them through gritted teeth. "We're leaving." "Smart choice," Mason said. "But Blackwood? You personally lay another hand on a woman or child, and I'll find you. That's not a threat. It's a promise from one soldier to another." Blackwood mounted his horse awkwardly with his wounded hand. As he turned to leave, he looked back one more time. "You were at Willow Creek, weren't you? In Missouri. I can smell it on you, that particular kind of guilt. Mercer's going to love knowing that. He was there too, you know. Different side, but there. Small world, ain't it?" Mason went very still. Eleanor saw something change in his face, a deepening of the shadows that lived behind his eyes. Blackwood saw it too and smiled coldly before spurring his horse down the trail, his remaining men following like whipped dogs. When they were gone, Thomas approached Mason. "They will return with more men." "I know." Mason's voice was distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. "That's why we're not going to be here." Eleanor emerged from the cabin, the revolver still in her hand. Her legs shook, but she kept herself upright through sheer will. "Willow Creek," she said quietly. "You were there." Mason turned to look at her, and she saw the full weight of his guilt in that gaze. "I was. My mother died there." "I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I mean, I didn't know she was your mother, but I was there. I led the unit that burned the farm." Eleanor felt the world tilt. The man who'd saved her, who'd risked everything to help her, was the same man who'd destroyed her family. The revolver in her hand suddenly felt very heavy. Thomas stepped between them, his hand not quite on his knife, but ready. "The past is the past," he said carefully. "Today we have the living to think about." "The living," Eleanor repeated, tasting the words. She thought of her mother, of the stories she'd told before she died, fevered and broken from the trauma of that night. Thought of the nightmares that had plagued her childhood, the smell of smoke that still made her panic. Then she thought of the mine of 187 souls waiting for salvation. "You burned the farm," she said to Mason. "Yes." Did you know there were children in the root cellar? Mason's face crumpled. Not until it was too late. We were told it was a Confederate supply depot. The intelligence was wrong or deliberately false. By the time we realized, the fire had spread too fast. I tried to get them out, but the smoke, the heat. He stopped, unable to continue. Eleanor raised the revolver. Mason didn't move, didn't even blink. He just stood there waiting for her judgment. The Apache warriors shifted nervously, but Thomas held up a hand, keeping them still. "My mother used to have nightmares," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. "She'd wake up screaming about the soldiers, about the fire. But you know what she said about the officer who tried to save us? She said he fought his own men to get to the cellar, said he burned his hands, pulling at the boards, trying to make an opening, said he was screaming for water, for help, for God himself to stop the flames." Mason's breath caught. She saw everything, told me about the officer who carried out 2 children before the roof collapsed. 2 children who weren't his responsibility, weren't even his people, but he saved them anyway. Then he went back for more and the building came down. Eleanor lowered the revolver. "That was you, wasn't it?" "I couldn't save them all," Mason said, his voice broken. "Your mother, the others in the cellar. I couldn't save them." "But you tried." Eleanor wiped her tears with her free hand. "And you've been dying for it every day since, haven't you? Living out here alone, punishing yourself for something that was done to you as much as by you." "I gave the order to burn the buildings. Based on lies you were told, in a war where everyone was lying." Eleanor stepped forward past Thomas until she stood directly in front of Mason. "My mother died hating the war, hating the men who gave orders on both sides, but she never hated the soldier who tried to save her children. She called him the only decent man in either uniform she'd seen." Mason's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on a rock, his head in his hands. "I've seen her face every night for 20 years, her and the children I couldn't reach." Eleanor knelt beside him, set down the revolver, and took his hands in hers. They were scarred, she realized, old burn scars across the palms and fingers. "Then help me save these children. Help me stop Mercer from creating more ghosts. My mother wouldn't want her death to lead to more death. She'd want it to mean something." Thomas cleared his throat. "The sun climbs. If we are to reach the mine before Mercer can move the prisoners, we must go now." Mason looked up at Eleanor, saw forgiveness he didn't deserve in her eyes, and found the strength to stand. "You're right. Both of you." He turned to Thomas. "How many warriors can you gather?" "By tonight, 20, maybe 30. But Mason attacking the mine directly would be suicide. It's a fortress." "Then we don't attack directly." Mason's tactical mind was re-engaging, pushing aside the emotional turmoil for later. "Eleanor, you said there were old sections of the mine parts they don't use anymore." "Yes, the eastern tunnels. They were the first ones dug back in the 50s. Mercer had them sealed when he found richer veins to the west." "Sealed from the inside, but what about from the outside, Thomas? Your people know every cave, every hidden entrance in these mountains." Thomas's eyes lit with understanding. "You think there might be another way in?" Mining companies in the 50s were sloppy about records, and they always dug ventilation shafts. If we can find one. Mason trailed off, his mind already working through possibilities. Eleanor stood wincing as her injuries made themselves known. "Even if we get in, we'd need to deal with the guards, free the prisoners, and get them out before Mercer's reinforcements arrive." "Which is why we need the marshal," Mason said. "When's your nephew expected back, Thomas?" "If he rides hard tonight, maybe dawn tomorrow. But the marshal will need time to gather men, and like you said, most local law is Mercer's. Then we create a distraction. Something big enough that Mercer has to respond, has to send his men away from the mine." Mason looked at Eleanor. "That ledger page you stole, or there more where that came from?" "In Mercer's personal safe at his compound. But that place is a fortress too, guards everywhere." "Perfect." Mason smiled, and it was the smile of a soldier who'd found his purpose again. "Thomas, I need your best scouts to find us a back way into that mine. Eleanor, you're going to draw me a map of Mercer's compound, every detail you can remember. We're going to hit him where he lives." "That's insane," Eleanor said. "You're talking about attacking Clayton Mercer directly in his own home." "No, I'm talking about burning his house down while he's trying to save his fortune in papers. Man like Mercer, he doesn't just have ledgers about the mine. He's got records of every bribe, every murder, every crime he's committed or ordered, threatened with losing all that he'll send every available man to save it. Thomas nodded slowly. While his men rush to save his papers, we enter the mine and free the prisoners. But shit, there's still the problem of getting them all out safely, Eleanor pointed out. 187 people, including children and elderly. They can't all fight or run. Which is why we need transportation waiting, wagons, horses, anything that moves. Mason turned to Thomas. Your people have been raiding Mercer's supply lines for years. Time to call in those hidden caches. This is war you're talking about, Thomas said. Open war against the white man's law. No, Mason corrected. This is war against one man who's perverted the law. The federal marshal will make it legal, but we can't wait for him to act. Every hour we delay is another hour those people suffer, another hour closer to Mercer sealing them in that mine forever. Eleanor was studying Mason with something like wonder. You've changed. Yesterday you were a hermit hiding from the world. Now you're planning a military campaign. Yesterday I didn't have a reason to fight. Today I do. He met her eyes. Your mother, the other victims at Willow Creek, they're dead. I can't change that. But those people in the mine are alive. That's a fight worth having, worth dying for if necessary. Nobody's dying, Eleanor said firmly. We've all lost enough. This time we win and we survive. Thomas's warriors had been dealing with the wounded and dead from the skirmish. Now one of them approached and spoke quickly in Apache. Thomas's expression darkened. What is it? Mason asked. Scouts report movement on the southern road. Many riders, maybe 50, moving fast toward Mercer's compound. And Mason, they wear badges. It's a sheriff's posse from Tucson. Damn, Mason muttered. Mercer called in favors. 50 deputized men changes everything. We could wait, Eleanor suggested. Let them pass strike after they've gone. No. 50 extra men at the compound means 50 more guns at the mine when Mercer moves the prisoners. We stick to the plan, but we move faster. Mason made rapid decisions. Thomas, get your warriors moving. Find those ventilation shafts. Eleanor, we need to get you somewhere safe while you draw those maps. I'm coming with you, she said immediately. You can barely stand. That arm needs rest, and you've lost too much blood for a fight. I didn't come this far to sit on the sidelines. Mason gripped her shoulders gently. Eleanor, you've already done the impossible. You escaped Mercer, stole the evidence, survived his hunters. Now let others carry the fight while you heal. Besides, he added with a slight smile, someone needs to coordinate with the marshal when he arrives. Someone he'll trust who can explain everything. That's you. She wanted to argue, could see it in her eyes, but practicality won. Fine. But if you get yourself killed playing hero Mason Reed, I'll find a way to bring you back just to kill you again myself. Noted. He turned to Thomas. Your people have a safe place for her. My sister's camp, Hidden Valley, 5 miles north. She'll be protected like family. They moved quickly, then gathering what supplies they could from Mason's cabin. He pulled out his old military maps of the territory annotated with 20 years of exploration. Eleanor sketched Mercer's compound from memory on the back of one, her hand steady despite everything. The main house is here, she said, marking X's and squares. Guards posted here, here, and here. The safe is in his study northeast corner, 2nd floor. But Mason, that safe is 3 feet of steel. You can't crack it. Don't need to, just need Mercer to think I'm trying. He studied her drawing. This building here, what is it? Stables and storage. Hay grain lamp oil. Trailed off, understanding dawning. You're going to burn it all, aren't you? Fire has a way of making men panic, make bad decisions. Mercer sees his empire burning, he won't think straight. Eleanor touched the burn scar on his hand. Fire also has a way of getting out of control. I know, but sometimes you have to use the weapons you understand best, even if they've hurt you before. Thomas returned from organizing his warriors. Scouts are away. My best trackers are searching for those shafts. Sister waits to take the woman to safety. Eleanor stood swayed slightly, and Mason steadied her. For a moment they stood close, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. Something passed between them, something that had been building since that first moment when she'd begged for his help. Come back, she whispered. Whatever else happens, come back. I'll try. Don't try. Do. She pulled his head down and kissed him, fierce and desperate and full of promise. That's so you remember what you're coming back to. When she pulled away, Mason was speechless. Thomas cleared his throat, amusement clear in his eyes. The sun moves and so must we. Eleanor was helped onto a horse by two Apache women who'd arrived to escort her. As they prepared to leave, she looked back one more time. Mason, there's something else about the mine you should know. Some of the children, Mercer's been teaching them they deserve to be slaves, teaching them they're inferior, worthless. Even if you free their bodies, we'll free their minds too, Mason promised, however long it takes. She nodded and rode away with her escort. Mason watched until they disappeared over a ridge, then turned to Thomas. Ready for war, old friend? I've been ready since they killed my brother. The question is, are you ready to let go of your guilt long enough to win? Mason thought about Eleanor's forgiveness, about the children in the mine, about the chance for redemption he'd never thought he'd have. Yeah, I'm ready. They set out as the sun reached its zenith, a small war party against an empire built on suffering. The odds were impossible, the plan was insane, and failure meant death for everyone involved. But for the first time in 20 years, Mason Reed felt truly alive. He had a purpose, a reason to fight, and maybe, just maybe, a reason to survive. Behind them, smoke rose from his burning cabin. He'd set it ablaze himself, destroying the last vestige of his self-imposed exile. There was no going back now, only forward toward either redemption or death. Mason found he was fine with either outcome as long as those children went free. The desert stretched before them, harsh and unforgiving, but also full of hidden paths and secret places. Thomas's people knew them all had been using them for generations to survive, to resist, to endure. Now those paths would lead them to war against a man who thought himself untouchable, who built his empire on the bodies of the innocent. As they rode, Mason touched the pocket where he'd placed Eleanor's sketch of the compound. Her kiss still burned on his lips, a reminder that there might be something beyond the fight, beyond the guilt and the ghosts. Something worth living for, not just dying for. The war party moved like shadows across the desert Apache and white man united in purpose. The sun tracked across the sky, marking time until darkness would cover their approach. Somewhere ahead, Clayton Mercer sat in his fortress, confident in his power, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to burn. And in a mine carved from mountain stone, 187 souls waited in chains. Not knowing that salvation was coming, carried on desert wind and righteous fury, led by a broken soldier seeking redemption and a woman's courage that had started it all. The second phase of the battle was about to begin. The sun was bleeding crimson across the western mountains when Thomas's scout returned with news that changed everything. Mason watched the young Apache warrior dismount his horse, lathered with sweat from hard riding, and knew from his expression that their carefully laid plans were about to shatter. The mine, the scout gasped in broken English. They move prisoners now, not waiting 3 days, loading them into wagons. Mason felt his blood turn to ice. How many wagons? 6 covered ones. Many guards. They take them south toward the new site. Thomas cursed in Apache, then translated the rest of the scout's report. Mercer's at the mine personally overseeing the transfer. 50 men with him, maybe more. The sheriff's posse from Tucson joined them an hour ago. He knows, Mason said quietly. Somehow Mercer knows we're coming. Or he's just being cautious, Thomas suggested. Either way, we've lost our advantage. We can't take 70 men in open combat, not with 30 warriors. Mason's mind raced through possibilities, discarding plans as quickly as he formed them. The wagons would be heavily guarded, the route would be watched, and any attempt at a direct assault would be a massacre. But doing nothing meant condemning those people to disappear forever into Mercer's new hellhole. The wagon, Seth, he said suddenly. They have to take the canyon road to go south. There's no other way for wheeled vehicles. Thomas's eyes lit with understanding. Bright Angel Canyon, the Narrows. Exactly, it's a natural bottleneck. If we could block it. Rockslide, Thomas said immediately. My people have used them before to stop cavalry. But Mason, even if we trap the wagons, we'd still be outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Not if we divide their forces first. Mason pulled out Eleanor's map of the compound. We stick to the original plan but modified. You take half your warriors and hit Mercer's compound. Make it loud, make it visible. Fire explosions, everything. Mercer will have to send men back to defend it. While you take the rest and ambush the wagons, no, I go alone to the compound first before your attack. I need to get into that safe, or at least make Mercer think I have. If he believes his records are compromised, he'll panic. Panic makes men stupid. Thomas studied his friend's face. This is suicide. You can't take the compound alone. I don't need to take it. I just need to get to the study and get out. 20 years of military infiltration training has to count for something. And if you're caught, then you proceed with the rock slide anyway. Save who you can. They rode hard through the deepening twilight, Thomas's warriors spreading out to avoid detection. As they neared the split in the trail where they would separate, Thomas pulled Mason aside. There's something else, the scout reported. Among the prisoners, he saw a white woman helping with the children. Auburn hair, green eyes. She matches the description of someone you asked about years ago. Mason's breath caught. Sarah McKenna. Perhaps. The scout couldn't be certain from the distance. Sarah McKenna. The woman who'd tried to help at Willow Creek, who'd stood up to Mason's sergeant when he wanted to shoot survivors. She'd disappeared after the war, and Mason had searched for her, wanting to thank her to apologize to something. If she was among Mercer's prisoners, all the more reason to succeed, Mason said grimly. They parted ways at Devil's Fork, Thomas leading 20 warriors toward the canyon, while Mason took 5 of the youngest, fastest riders toward Mercer's compound. The plan required precise timing. Thomas would position his men for the rock slide, then wait for the signal that Mason had penetrated the compound. Only then would they split half to create the avalanche, half to attack the compound and draw off guards. The Mercer compound squatted on the landscape like a cancer, all sharp angles and high walls. Mason studied it from a ridge, comparing reality to Eleanor's map. Guard towers at the corners, men walking the walls, torches already being lit against the approaching darkness. But there on the eastern side, where the wall met the mountain, a drainage grate Eleanor had mentioned. Too small for most men, but Mason had spent 3 years in the wilderness living on rabbit and rattlesnake. He could fit. He left the Apache riders hidden with specific instructions. Wait for my signal of fire in the upper window. If you don't see it, within an hour ride to Thomas and tell him to proceed without the compound distraction. The youngest warrior, barely 16, grabbed Mason's arm. You are the one who saved Thomas from the rustlers. We owe you a debt. Let me come with you. Your debt is to help save those prisoners. That's how you repay it. Mason made his way down the ridge on foot, moving through shadows with skills honed in a dozen night raids during the war. The drainage grate was exactly where Eleanor had said, thick with rust, but possible to work loose. The sound of metal on stone seemed deafening to him, but the guards on the walls above showed no sign of hearing. The drain tunnel was a nightmare of confined space and stagnant water barely wide enough for his shoulders. Mason crawled through darkness, navigating by touch and memory of Eleanor's descriptions. Twice he had to stop fighting down panic, as the walls seemed to close in. This was worse than any battlefield, worse than any military operation he'd undertaken. At least in war you could see your enemy. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, his hands found vertical iron rungs. The tunnel opened into a larger cistern, and above a grate led into what Eleanor had said was a storage room. Mason climbed, tested the grate, found it loose enough to lift. The storage room was dark and dusty, filled with forgotten furniture and moldering ledgers. Mason paused, listening. Footsteps above, voices in the distance, but nothing immediate. He eased into the room, replaced the grate, and crept to the door. The hallway beyond was dimly lit by oil lamps. According to Eleanor, the study was 2 doors down on the left, but there would be guards. Mason could hear them talking, complaining about missing the action at the mine. Don't know why we got stuck here, one voice grumbled. Nothing to guard but papers while everyone else gets to teach those slaves a lesson. Mercer's orders, another replied. After that woman stole from the safe, he wants men here at all times. Still say we're missing the fun. Heard Blackwood's planning something special for the troublemakers. Especially that teacher woman who's been filling the children's heads with ideas. Mason's jaw clenched. The teacher had to be Sarah if Thomas's scout was right. He drew his knife, checked his pistol, and prepared to move. 2 guards, maybe 3 from the sound of it. He needed to be quick and silent. He stepped into the hallway and immediately everything went wrong. A third guard he hadn't heard was right outside the door, turning in surprise. Mason's knife took him in the throat before he could cry out, but the man's rifle clattered to the floor. The other guards spun hands, going to their weapons. Mason shot the first one, the sound thunderous in the enclosed space. The second managed to shout, "Intruder!" before Mason's second shot silenced him, but the damage was done. He could hear running feet, voices raised in alarm. No time for subtlety now. Mason kicked in the study door, found the safe Eleanor had described. It was massive, imposing, and definitely beyond his ability to crack. But that wasn't the point. He pulled out the small bottle of oil he'd brought, splashed it on the papers covering Mercer's desk, and lit them with a lamp. The fire caught quickly, too quickly. The entire desk erupted in flames, and Mason realized Eleanor had been right about the oil stored here. The room was a tinderbox. He grabbed random ledgers from the shelves, hoping they contained something useful, then turned to escape. Men were flooding the hallway, armed and angry. Mason shot the first two through the doorway, then dove behind the heavy desk as bullets tore through the air where he'd been standing. The fire was spreading, smoke filling the room. His eyes watered, his lungs burned, and he was trapped. Then he remembered Eleanor's map. The window. She'd marked it, specifically noted that it overlooked the stable roof. Mason grabbed a chair and hurled it through the glass, then followed it out into the night air. He hit the stable roof hard, pain shooting through his shoulder, and rolled to break his fall. Below, men were shouting, pointing. A rifle cracked and wood splintered next to Mason's head. He ran along the roof ridge, leaped to the next building, kept moving. The compound was chaos now, men running everywhere, some toward the fire, others searching for him. The Apache riders saw the flames and acted without waiting for a specific signal. War cries split the night as they attacked the main gate, drawing guards away from Mason's position. He dropped from the roof, landed hard, and ran for the wall. A guard appeared in front of him, rifle raising. Mason didn't slow down, just lowered his shoulder and hit the man like a battering ram. They went down together, wrestling for the weapon. The guard was younger, stronger, and he was winning. His hands found Mason's throat, squeezing. Black spots danced in Mason's vision. Then the pressure was gone, the guard toppling sideways with an Apache arrow in his back. One of the young warriors had followed him after all. "Go!" the warrior shouted, pulling Mason to his feet. "More coming!" They ran together, dodging gunfire as the compound burned behind them. Made it to the wall where ropes waited, climbed as bullets whined past. At the top, Mason turned back to see the entire eastern wing of the compound in flames. Mercer would have to respond to this, had to send men back from the convoy. The ride to Bright Angel Canyon was a nightmare of speed and darkness. Mason's shoulder screamed with every movement, probably dislocated from his fall. The young Apache warrior who'd saved him rode alongside, grim satisfaction on his face. "You burned it good," he said. "The whole sky is orange." They heard the convoy before they saw it. Wagons creaking, horses snorting, men calling to each other. Mason and the warrior climbed to where Thomas waited with the main force, positioned above the narrowest part of the canyon. "You look like hell," Thomas observed, taking in Mason's burned clothes and bloody face. "Feel worse." "But it worked. Look." Mason pointed back toward the compound where the glow of fire lit the horizon. "Mercer will have to—" The sound of hoofbeats interrupted him. Riders were peeling off from the convoy, at least 20 men racing back toward the compound. Mason smiled grimly. The fish had taken the bait. "Now?" Thomas asked. "Wait. Let them get further away. We want them too far to turn back when we spring the trap." They waited, tension building, as the wagons rolled closer to the kill zone. Mason could see them clearly now in the moonlight. 6 covered wagons, each probably holding 30 people crammed in like cattle. The remaining guards rode alongside, rifles ready, but they were watching the ridges, not the canyon walls above. "There," Thomas pointed. "The lead wagon, that's Mercer." Clayton Mercer rode a black stallion beside the first wagon, his silver hair catching the moonlight. Even from this distance, Mason could feel the man's arrogance, his absolute confidence that his will would be done. Beside him rode Blackwood, his bandaged hand not stopping him from carrying a shotgun. "On my signal," Mason whispered. The convoy entered the narrows. The canyon walls rose sheer on both sides, barely wide enough for the wagons to pass. It was perfect. "Now!" Thomas's warriors went to work with practiced efficiency. Logs and boulders carefully positioned hours ago were levered free. The rock slide started small pebbles and dirt, then larger stones. The guards looked up in alarm, shouting warnings. Then the entire hillside came down. The thunder was deafening. Tons of rock crashed into the canyon, missing the wagons by mere feet as the drivers whipped their teams forward in panic. The avalanche sealed the canyon behind the convoy, trapping them. "Move!" Mason shouted, and 30 warriors descended the canyon walls like ghosts. The guards, already panicked by the rock slide, were completely unprepared for the Apache assault. War cries echoed off the canyon walls as arrows and bullets found their targets. Some guards threw down their weapons immediately, others tried to fight and were overwhelmed. Mason went straight for the lead wagon where Mercer had taken cover. The mining baron was screaming orders, trying to rally his men, but chaos reigned. Mason shot the lock off the wagon's back gate and threw it open. Inside, people huddled in terror. Men, women, children, all branded with Mercer's mark, all chained together. And there at the back, shielding 2 small children with her body, was Sarah McKenna. Her auburn hair was gray now, her face lined with hardship, but Mason would have known her anywhere. "Sarah," he breathed. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Captain Reed, but you're dead. They said you died at Willow Creek." "Almost did. We need to get these people out, now." He began working on the chains with tools grabbed from a fallen guard. Sarah helped her hands steady despite everything happening around them. The children clung to her skirts, terrified but trusting. "You became a teacher," Mason said as he worked. "You became a hermit from what I heard. What changed? Everything. Duck." He pulled her down as Blackwood appeared at the wagon's opening, shotgun raised. The blast tore through the space where they'd been standing. Mason rolled, came up with his pistol, but Blackwood was already cycling the second barrel. An Apache war lance took Blackwood in the chest, thrown by Thomas from 20 feet away. The big man looked down at it in surprise, then toppled backward into the dust. "Even," Thomas called. "Even," Mason confirmed, remembering Thomas saving him at the compound. They worked frantically to free all the prisoners. Some were too weak to walk, others too traumatized to understand they were being rescued. The children were the worst, some born in captivity, never knowing freedom. They cringed from their rescuers, had to be coaxed out of the wagons. "Where's Mercer?" Mason suddenly realized he'd lost track of the mining baron in the chaos. "There," Sarah pointed. Mercer was climbing the canyon wall using a hidden trail. He was escaping, leaving his men to their fate. Mason started after him, but Thomas grabbed his arm. "The prisoners first. He can wait." Mason wanted to argue, but Thomas was right. They needed to get these people to safety before Mercer's reinforcements arrived. The warriors were already helping people climb the canyon walls to where horses and wagons waited, liberated from Mercer's own stables. It took an hour to move everyone. Some had to be carried. Others needed constant reassurance that this was real, that they were actually free. Sarah worked tirelessly, organizing the evacuation with the efficiency of someone used to managing chaos. "You've done this before," Mason observed. "Been planning it for months," she admitted. "Teaching the children to read was just the cover. I've been preparing them for escape, keeping their spirits alive. I just never had the means until now." "Why were you there at all?" Sarah's face darkened. "I came west to teach at a frontier school. Mercer's men took me off the stage, claimed I owed money for transportation. Next thing I knew, I was branded and in chains. That was 2 years ago." 2 years? Mason felt sick thinking about what she'd endured. Sarah had been one of the few bright spots at Willow Creek, trying to help to minimize the horror. To think of her enslaved— "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have looked harder for you after the war." "You looked for years. Wanted to thank you for what you did that night, trying to save those families." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "We all did what we could. It wasn't enough, but we tried." A rider approached at full gallop, one of Thomas's scouts, his face grim. "Soldiers coming from the compound, many, and Mason, the federal marshal, is with them." "Carter? He's here already." "He was closer than we thought. Your message reached him and he rode through the night. But Mason Mercer's with the soldiers. He's convinced them we're the criminals, that this is a slave uprising that needs to be put down." Mason cursed. Of course, Mercer would twist the narrative. A rich white man's word against Apache warriors and freed slaves. The soldiers wouldn't ask questions until after the shooting stopped. How long, sir? Thomas asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. They had to move, but many of the freed prisoners could barely walk. They'd never outrun mounted soldiers. Mason made a decision. Thomas, take your warriors and the strongest prisoners. Get them to safety. Sarah, you go with them. What about you? Sarah asked. Someone needs to slow down. Those soldiers explain what's really happening. They'll shoot you on sight, Thomas protested. Maybe. But I'm still a Union officer, technically, never officially discharged. If I can get Carter to listen, and if you can't, Mason checked his weapons. Then you'll hear the shooting and know to run faster. He wouldn't let them argue further. Taking one of the horses, he rode back toward the approaching soldiers. The moon was setting now, darkness spreading across the desert. In the distance, dust clouds marked the approaching column. Mason positioned himself in the middle of the trail, hands visible but near his weapons. He could make out individual riders now. Mercer at the front, gesticulating wildly, no doubt spinning tales of Apache atrocities and escaped slaves running amok. Beside him rode a younger man in a federal marshal's badge. Carter, presumably. That's far enough, Mason called when they were 50 yards away. Rifles swung toward him. Mercer's face contorted with rage. That's him, the renegade who's been organizing the savages. Shoot him. Hold! Carter raised his hand. The marshal was young, maybe 30, with intelligent eyes that took in everything. You're Mason Reed, Pulshay, Captain Mason Reed, 5th Cavalry, retired, and you're riding with a slaver and murderer marshal. He's lying, Mercer shouted. This man attacked my compound, burned my property, freed dangerous criminals. I freed enslaved human beings, while Mason interrupted. Men, women, and children that Mercer branded like cattle and worked to death in his mine. I have proof, Marshal. Documents taken from Mercer's own safe. He pulled out the ledgers he'd grabbed, tossed them to Carter. The marshal caught them, began scanning by lamplight. His face grew increasingly grim. These are forgeries, Mercer said quickly. Part of this criminal's elaborate scheme. Then you won't mind showing me the mine? Carter asked mildly. Let me interview these supposed dangerous criminals myself. The mine suffered a cave-in, tragic accident, no survivors. Funny how convenient that is, Mason said. Marshal, there are 187 people who can testify to what Mercer did to them. They're branded with his initials. The children born in captivity have never seen anything but the inside of that mine. Carter was studying both men, weighing truth against lies. Mr. Mercer, I'll need to investigate these allegations. This is outrageous. I'm a respected businessman, a pillar of this community. You're going to take the word of a hermit and savages over mine. I'm going to follow the evidence, Carter said calmly. And right now that evidence suggests Mercer drew his pistol fast for a man his age. But Mason was faster. His shot took Mercer in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The soldiers raised their rifles, but Carter commanded them to hold. Nobody move, the marshal ordered. He dismounted, walked to where Mercer writhed in the dust. Clayton Mercer, you're under arrest for attempted murder of a federal officer, and that's just the start. You can't, Mercer gasped. I own this territory. I own the judges, the politicians. You don't own me, Carter said simply. He looked up at Mason. Where are these freed prisoners? Safe, but they need medical attention, food, shelter. Many are in bad shape. We'll see to it. Carter turned to his men. Some of you are probably on Mercer's payroll. This is your one chance to come clean. Step forward now and I'll show leniency. Stay silent, and when I find out, and I will find out, you'll share his fate. 3 men dismounted, badges thrown in the dirt. Carter noted their names, then dismissed them. The rest of you, we have work to do. As the soldiers organized to help the freed prisoners, Mason found himself alone with Mercer. The former Confederate colonel looked older now, diminished, his empire crumbling around him. You were at Willow Creek, Mercer said, his voice weak from pain and defeat. I remember now. You're the one who tried to save them when the fire started. Yes. I was on the other side. Lost my brother in that raid. He was defending the supplies in the barn. Mercer laughed bitterly. There were no supplies, just hay and old farm equipment. We all died for nothing that night. Not nothing, Mason said. We died for lies, for hatred, for the inability to see each other as human. Is that what you think I am? Inhuman? Mason looked at the man who'd enslaved children, who'd branded human beings, who'd built an empire on suffering. I think you're what happens when someone confuses power with worth, when they need others to be less so they can feel like more. You're not inhuman, Mercer. You're the most human thing there is. Selfish, scared, and willing to hurt others to avoid facing your own emptiness. Mercer had no response to that. The fight had gone out of him with his blood seeping into the desert sand. Marshal Carter returned bringing Sarah and several of the freed prisoners to give statements, as they spoke telling their stories of horror and survival. Mason noticed Eleanor approaching on horseback, escorted by Apache warriors. She was still pale, her arm in a sling, but her eyes blazed with triumph. "You did it," she said, sliding from her horse despite obvious pain. "You actually did it." "We did it," Mason corrected, catching her as she swayed. "None of this happens without your courage." "The children are free," she whispered, and there were tears on her face. "They're actually free." Marshal Carter approached them. "Miss Hayes, I understand you're the one who obtained the initial evidence." "Yes, Marshal." "You're a hero, ma'am. What you did, not many would have that courage." Eleanor shook her head. "The real heroes are the ones who survived years in that mine and never gave up hope. I just had the opportunity to act." As dawn broke over the canyon painting, the rocks in shades of gold and crimson, the freed prisoners were loaded onto wagons for the journey to Prescott. There would be a reckoning there, trials and testimony, the slow work of justice. Some of Mercer's men would hang. Others would go to prison, and Mercer himself would face federal charges that would see him die behind bars. But that was for tomorrow. Today, Mason stood with Eleanor and Sarah, watching children see their first sunrise as free human beings. One little girl, the 2-year-old, who'd been born in the mine, reached up to touch the sky with wonder in her eyes. "What will happen to them?" Eleanor asked. "Where will they go?" "Some have families to return to," Sarah said. "Others will have to build new lives. I'm thinking of starting a school, a real one, for the children who have nowhere else." "I'll help," Eleanor said immediately. "I have some money saved and—" "We'll all help," Mason interrupted. He looked at Thomas, who stood with his warriors proud and unbowed despite everything they'd risked. "This territory needs to change. What Mercer built on fear and hatred, we can rebuild on something better." Thomas smiled. "Apache and white and Mexican all together. That would be something new." "Something worth building," Mason agreed. As the convoy of freed souls began its journey toward new lives, Mason felt something shift inside him. The weight he'd carried for 20 years hadn't disappeared, might never fully leave, but it had transformed. The ghosts of Willow Creek were still there, would always be there, but now they felt less like tormentors and more like reminders. Reminders of the cost of hatred, the price of following orders without conscience, the importance of standing up when it mattered. Eleanor slipped her hand into his. "So what now, Captain Reed?" "Back to your hermit's life." Mason looked at her, this remarkable woman who'd forgiven the unforgivable, who'd risked everything for strangers, who'd shown him that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing a better future. "No," he said. "I think my hermit days are over." "Good," she said, and kissed him there in front of everyone, not caring who saw or what they thought. Sarah laughed, the first genuine joy Mason had heard from her. "About time you found someone, Captain. You were always too serious, even during the war." "Still serious," Mason said, but he was smiling. "Just have better reasons now." As they mounted up to follow the convoy, Mercer called out from where he lay wounded, waiting for transport. "Reed, this isn't over. I have friends' influence. You've won a battle, not the war." Mason looked back at the broken man who'd once ruled this territory through fear. "You're right, Mercer. The war's not over. It never really ends. But the difference is now we're fighting for something better than just victory. We're fighting for the chance to heal, to build, to prove that your way doesn't have to be the only way." He turned away, leaving Mercer to his fate, and rode toward a future that for the first time in 20 years held more promise than pain. The journey to Prescott should have taken 2 days, but with wounded to tend and children who'd never walked such distances, it stretched to 4. Mason rode rear guard, watching for any of Mercer's men who might attempt a rescue or revenge, but the desert remained quiet except for the creaking of wagon wheels and the soft voices of people learning to speak freely again. On the second night, camped by a stream where cottonwoods provided shade, Eleanor found him standing watch on a ridge. Her arm was healing, though she still favored it, and the desert sun had brought color back to her cheeks. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling beside him on a flat rock still warm from the day's heat. "Old habits," Mason replied. "Besides, someone needs to watch. Thomas has scouts out. You can rest." But Mason's eyes remained fixed on the horizon where the last light was fading. "I keep thinking about what Mercer said. He has friends' influence. Men like him don't just disappear because they're arrested. They have lawyers' connections, ways to twist the law." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I didn't tell you everything about what I took from his safe." Mason turned to look at her. In the dim light, he could see her smile, sharp and satisfied. "This is a list of every judge, politician, and lawman Mercer's been paying off. Amounts dates what they did for him. Names you'd recognize: Mason, territorial governor's aide, 2 federal judges, even an army colonel at Fort Huachuca. My God, this could bring down half the territorial government, which is why I didn't give it to Marshall Carter yet. I wanted to talk to you first." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some of these people might have been coerced. Others might have taken money but never acted on it. If we release this list, they'll all burn equally." Mason understood her dilemma. Justice demanded exposure, but wisdom suggested some might deserve a second chance the way he'd been given one. "What do you think your mother would do?" he asked. Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness. "She'd say that mercy without justice is just weakness, but justice without mercy is just revenge. We need both. Then we give the list to Carter, but privately. Let him investigate, determine who's truly corrupt and who might have been trapped. The ones who come forward, who help testify against Mercer, they get leniency. And the others, they fall with him." Below them, the camp was settling for the night. Sarah had organized a school session, even on the trail, teaching letters to children who'd been forbidden to learn. Mason could hear their voices reciting the alphabet, a sound that would have been punishable by death in Mercer's mind. "She's remarkable," Eleanor said, following his gaze. "Sarah, the way she kept those people's spirits alive, gave them hope when there was none. She was like that during the war, too, always finding the humanity in inhuman situations." Mason paused, old guilt surfacing. "She tried to stop what happened at Willow Creek. Stood up to my sergeant, tried to get him to search for survivors before torching the buildings. He threatened to shoot her for insubordination. But she tried anyway. She did, just like you." Mason turned to face Eleanor fully. "I need to tell you something about that night, about what really happened." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. You deserve the whole truth." Mason took a breath, organizing memories he'd tried to bury for 2 decades. "We'd been chasing Confederate raiders for weeks. They'd been hitting our supply lines, killing scouts. The intelligence said they were using the farm as a base. When we arrived, it looked abandoned. No lights, no movement. My sergeant wanted to burn it immediately, deny the enemy resources. I should have searched it first, should have insisted, but I was tired, angry about the men we'd lost. I gave the order." His voice caught, but Eleanor's presence gave him strength to continue. "The fire spread faster than anyone expected. Then we heard the screaming. The families had been hiding in the root cellar, women and children mostly. The smoke got to them first. When we realized what was happening, I tried to get to them. Tore the door off with my bare hands, pulled out. 2 children went back for more. But the roof collapsed. Your mother, the others, they were trapped. I could hear them, Eleanor. I could hear them dying, and I couldn't do anything." Tears ran down his face now, 20 years of suppressed anguish finally breaking free. The official report said it was bad intelligence, fog of war, tragic accident. But I knew the truth. I'd been careless with innocent lives. I'd let my anger, my fatigue, my desire For a simple solution override my duty to be certain. Those deaths are on me. Eleanor pulled him close, let him cry against her shoulder. When the storm passed, she spoke softly. My mother lived for 3 days after Willow Creek. 3 days of agony from the burns. But you know what she talked about? Not the soldiers who burned the farm. She talked about the officer who tried to save her children. She made me promise to remember that there was goodness even in the worst moments, that some people would risk everything to save strangers. I failed her. You tried, and you've been trying to make up for it ever since. That's not failure, Mason. That's human. They sat together as the stars emerged, desert bright and countless. Below, someone had started singing a soft melody that might have been a lullaby or a hymn. Other voices joined harmonies built from different languages and traditions, but somehow fitting together. They're healing, Eleanor said. All those broken people starting to become whole again. Are we? Mason asked. Can people like us really heal? I don't know, but I think we can choose to build something from the broken pieces. Maybe that's enough. A whistle from below interrupted them. Thomas was signaling. Mason stood instantly alert, but the Apache leader's gesture indicated friend, not foe. Riders were approaching from the north. They descended to find Marshall Carter had returned from a fast ride to Prescott with unexpected news. His face was grim as he gathered Mason, Eleanor, Sarah, and Thomas. There's been a development, he said without preamble. Mercer's lawyers have already filed motions. They're claiming the raid was illegal, that the freed prisoners are actually escaped criminals, that the Apache attack constitutes an act of war requiring military intervention. That's absurd, Sarah said. Of course it is. But they've got a judge in Tucson who's agreed to hear it. Judge Harlan Worth. Eleanor pulled out her list. Worth took $8,000 from Mercer over the past 3 years. Carter's eyes widened. You have proof, documentation in Mercer's own hand. Then we can get the venue changed, moved to federal court in Phoenix, where Carter trailed off, studying Eleanor's face. There's more, isn't there? The federal judge in Phoenix is also on the list, smaller amounts but consistent. Carter cursed something Mason had never heard from the straight-laced marshal. How deep does this go? Deep enough that we need a different strategy, Mason said. Legal channels are compromised. We need public pressure, newspaper coverage, something that makes it impossible for corrupt judges to bury this. The Prescott Herald is independent, Sarah suggested. Old Tom Morrison runs it. He hates Mercer, has for years, but never had proof of anything. Then we give him proof, Eleanor said. But more than that, we give him stories. Human stories. Let the public hear what happened in that mine, see the brands meet the children. Make it impossible to ignore. Carter nodded slowly. It's risky. Mercer's lawyers will claim we're prejudicing potential jurors. Let them, Mason said. We're not trying to win a legal battle. We're trying to win a war for public conscience. They reached Prescott the next morning, and the town's reaction was immediate and divided. Some citizens came out to help, offering food, shelter, medical care. Others watched from doorways with suspicious eyes, muttering about Apache raids and escaped slaves disrupting the peace. Tom Morrison, the newspaper editor, was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes behind wire spectacles. He listened to Eleanor's story, examined the documents, interviewed the freed prisoners. His photographer took pictures of the brands, the children, the families reunited after years of separation. This'll cause a firestorm, he said with satisfaction. Been waiting years to nail Mercer, but you know he won't go down easy. He's got resources, connections. This could get ugly. It got ugly faster than anyone expected. That night, as the freed prisoners were being housed in a warehouse converted to temporary shelter, armed men appeared on the streets, not attacking, just watching, making their presence known. Some wore badges, deputies from neighboring counties who happened to be visiting. Others were simply hard men with guns and no good intentions. Mason organized a defense positioning Thomas's warriors and willing townspeople to protect the shelter. But he knew they couldn't maintain a siege. They needed to force the issue. We take the fight to them, he told the assembled defenders. Tomorrow we march to the courthouse. Every freed prisoner who can walk. We demand justice in full view of the town. Make them show their true colors in daylight. That's dangerous, Carter warned. If shooting starts, innocent people will be caught in the crossfire. If shooting starts, it'll prove everything we've been saying about Mercer's corruption. Sometimes you have to risk everything to change anything. Eleanor stood. I'll lead the march. No, Mason said immediately. You're already a target, which is exactly why I should lead. A woman demanding justice for women and children. Let them try to shoot me in front of the whole town. See how that plays in the newspapers. Sarah stood too. I'll march with her. They can't shoot all of us. One by one, others stood, the freed prisoners understanding what was being asked, what was being risked. Even some townspeople conscience finally overcoming fear. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He walked the perimeter checking defenses, but his mind was on Eleanor. She was sleeping in the shelter with the other women refusing special treatment. Her courage amazed him, but it also terrified him. He'd lost too much already. The thought of losing her too. You love her. It wasn't a question. Sarah had appeared beside him, equally unable to sleep. Is it that obvious? To everyone but her, probably. She's too focused on the cause to notice how you look at her. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow's about justice, not personal feelings. Sarah laughed softly. Mason, everything's personal. That's what Mercer never understood. He thought he could reduce people to numbers in a ledger, but every number was a person with hopes, fears, loves. That's why he'll lose. Because we're fighting for people we care about, and he's just fighting for power. You think we'll win? I think we've already won the important part. Those people in there, they're free. Whatever happens tomorrow, no one can take that away. The rest is just paperwork. Dawn came gray and cold, unusual for the desert. The freed prisoners gathered in the shelter, some barely able to stand but determined to march. Eleanor stood at their head, wearing a simple dress that didn't hide the infected brand on her shoulder. Sarah flanked her, and behind them 187 souls ready to demand their humanity be recognized. Mason and Thomas positioned their fighters along the march route, ready to respond if violence erupted. Carter had deputized several townsmen, giving him legal authority to act, but everyone knew that legal authority meant little if Mercer's forces decided to attack. The march began at 8 o'clock sharp. They walked slowly, accommodating the weakest among them. Children held hands with adults they'd learned to trust. Former slaves of different races walked together, united by shared suffering and shared hope. The townspeople came out to watch. Some jeered, others cheered, most simply stared in shock at the brands, the scars, the evidence of horrors they'd preferred not to know about. Mercer's men lined the street leading to the courthouse. 40 of them, maybe 50, all armed. At their head stood not Mercer. He was still recovering from his wound, but his lawyer, a smooth-talking snake named Patterson, who'd gotten rich defending the indefensible. This is an illegal assembly, Patterson announced through a bullhorn. These people are escaped prisoners fleeing legal custody. Disperse immediately or face arrest. Eleanor never slowed. We're American citizens seeking redress from our government. Unless you're saying branded human beings aren't citizens anymore. You're thieves and insurrectionists. You attacked lawful businesses, destroyed property. We freed slaves. Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying clear and strong. And if you want to stop us, you'll have to do it in front of the whole town. Show everyone what you really are. The tension stretched taut. Fingers hovered near triggers. Mason could feel the violence brewing that moment before battle, when everything balanced on a knife's edge. Then a child began singing, the same little girl who'd touched the sky her first morning of freedom. Her voice was thin but pure, singing a hymn her mother had taught her in whispers in the dark of the mine. Other children joined, then adults, until the entire march was singing, moving forward with the slow inevitability of a river. Some of Mercer's men stepped aside. Not many, but a few. Conscience awakening at last. Others held their ground, but looked uncertain. Patterson was screaming orders, but his voice was drowned by the singing. They were 20 feet from the courthouse steps when the shot rang out. Eleanor spun and fell, blood spreading across her dress. Mason was moving before she hit the ground, covering her with his body as more shots erupted. But these came from Carter's men returning fire on the shooter, one of Mercer's hired guns who'd fired from a rooftop. The square erupted in chaos. Some of Mercer's men fled, others fought, and the freed prisoners scattered for cover. Thomas's warriors engaged from their positions, their accuracy devastating. But Mason saw none of it. His world had narrowed to Eleanor blood on his hands as he pressed against the wound in her side. "Stay with me," he begged. "Eleanor, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, focused on his face. "Did we make it to the courthouse?" "Almost. We almost made it." She smiled, blood on her lips. "Close enough. Mason, the list. Make sure Carter gets the list." "You'll give it to him yourself." "Stop lying to me. I can feel it. This is bad." Sarah appeared with bandages, working with desperate efficiency. Around them, the battle was already ending. Mercer's forces, faced with federal marshals and Apache warriors, and an aroused citizenry, were surrendering or fleeing. "You're going to be fine," Sarah said, but Mason heard the fear in her voice. Eleanor's hand found Mason's. "Whatever happens, this was worth it. They're free because we acted. Promise me you'll help them stay free." "I promise. But you're going to help too. You're going to be there." "Tell me about after," she whispered. "After all this is over, what do we do then?" Mason's throat was tight with unshed tears. "We build that school Sarah talked about. We make sure the children learn to read, to write, to think for themselves. We create the world that should have existed all along." "And us? What about us?" "We get married. We have children of our own. We grow old together, sitting on a porch somewhere, watching sunsets and remembering when we were young and brave and stupid enough to take on the world." Eleanor laughed, then gasped in pain. "That sounds nice. I'd like that." The doctor arrived, pushing Mason aside to work. He watched helplessly as they carried Eleanor into the courthouse, which had become an impromptu hospital. The battle was over. Mercer's forces scattered Patterson under arrest for inciting violence, the freed prisoners safe. But Mason felt no victory, only crushing fear. Sarah found him hours later, still waiting outside the room where doctors worked on Eleanor. His hands were still covered in her blood. "She's strong," Sarah said, "stronger than anyone I've known. I can't lose her. Not now. Not after everything." "You won't. She's got too much to live for." Sarah paused. "The marshal wants to see you, says it's important." Mason didn't want to leave, but Sarah promised to stay with Eleanor. He found Carter in the courthouse's main hall, surrounded by documents and grim-faced federal agents who'd arrived from Phoenix. "We've been going through Mercer's papers," Carter said. "What Miss Hayes provided, plus what we seized from his compound. Mason, this is bigger than we thought. Mercer was part of a network of former Confederates who never accepted defeat. They've been building shadow governments across the Southwest using slave labor to fund their operations. How many shut? At least 12 major operations like Mercer's. Maybe more. The president's being briefed. This is going to require a major federal response." Carter paused. "They want you to help lead it." "What?" "Your military experience, your knowledge of these men and their tactics. The Army's offering to reinstate your commission full colonel's rank. You'd be heading a task force to root out these operations." Mason looked back toward where Eleanor lay fighting for her life. "I made her a promise, to help these people stay free, to build something better. I can't do that from a military campaign. You can't do it if these networks remain in place either. They'll come back, Mason. Men like Mercer always do, unless someone stops them permanently." Before Mason could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway. Her face told him everything. "She's asking for you," she said simply. Mason ran. Eleanor was pale as paper against the sheets, but her eyes were clear. The doctor withdrew discreetly, his expression saying what words couldn't. "Hey, soldier," she whispered. "Hey yourself." He took her hand, careful of the bandages. "Sarah told me about the offer. You should take it." "No, I'm staying here with you." "Mason," she squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "I'm dying. We both know it, but the fight isn't over. Those other operations, those other slaves, they need someone like you. I need you. And you had me. For a brief shining moment, you had me completely." Tears ran down her face. "I need you to promise me something else. Anything. Don't let this break you. Don't go back to being alone. What we started here, the hope we created, carry it forward. Find someone else to love. Have those children. We talked about build that better world. Live, Mason. For both of us. Eleanor, please. Promise me." "I promise," he choked out. She smiled that fierce, beautiful smile that had first caught his attention. Good. Now tell me about Willow Creek, the truth of it. I want to understand the man I love completely. So he told her everything, his failures, his guilt, his years of running. She listened, her hand in his, her breathing growing shallower. When he finished, she spoke with effort. My mother's name was Clara. She was 28 when she died. She loved to sing, to teach, to garden. She would have forgiven you, Mason. I know because I do, completely and absolutely. I don't deserve it. Nobody deserves forgiveness. That's what makes it grace. Her eyes were growing heavy. Mason, will you sing for me? That hymn the children were singing? Mason couldn't carry a tune to save his life, but he sang anyway, his broken voice filling the small room. Eleanor's breathing slowed, evened out. For a moment he thought she'd simply fallen asleep, but her hand had gone slack in his. The funeral took place 3 days later. The entire town turned out, even those who'd opposed the march. The freed prisoners sang hymns. Apache warriors stood honor guard, and Marshal Carter read a statement from the president himself honoring Eleanor's sacrifice. Mason stood at her grave as the sun set, painting the desert in the colors of fire. Sarah stood beside him, both of them lost in their own grief. She was right, you know, Sarah said finally, about not letting this break you. I know. Doesn't make it easier. No, but it makes it necessary. She turned to face him. I'm staying here building that school we talked about. The freed families need stability, education. Hope. Will you help? Mason looked at the fresh earth covering Eleanor Hayes, the woman who'd forgiven the unforgivable, who'd shown him that redemption was possible. Then he looked at the town beyond, where children who'd been born in slavery were learning to read, where Apache and Mexican and white were working together for the first time. Yes, he said, but first I have a promise to keep. He pulled out the telegram from Washington authorizing his reinstatement. 12 operations to shut down hundreds more slaves to free. It would take years, maybe decades. But Eleanor had been right. The fight wasn't over. How long will you be gone? Sarah asked. As long as it takes. But I'll come back. This is home now. Sarah nodded. We'll be here, building that better world she believed in. As they walked back toward town, Mason felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Not peace that might never come, but purpose. Clear, undeniable purpose. Eleanor had given him that, along with her forgiveness and her love. The work ahead would be hard, dangerous, possibly fatal. But it was necessary, and it was right, and it was what she would have wanted. Tomorrow, he would leave for Phoenix to begin the campaign against the Shadow Confederacy. But tonight, he would help Sarah organize the school, would sit with the freed families and listen to their stories, would honor Eleanor's memory by living as she'd asked him to live. The stars were coming out, desert bright and infinite. Somewhere among them, Mason chose to believe Eleanor watched and approved. He would carry her with him into every battle, every victory, every moment of the life she'd insisted he live. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since Willow Creek, Mason Reed knew which side he was on and why it was worth fighting for. The morning Mason was to leave for Phoenix, he stood in the small cemetery, watching the sun rise over Eleanor's grave. Fresh flowers lay on the mound, desert marigolds that Sarah had placed there the evening before. He'd spent the night unable to sleep, walking the streets of Prescott, seeing Eleanor everywhere. In the courthouse where she'd bled. In the warehouse where the freed families still sheltered. In the very air that seemed to carry echoes of her voice. You're really going, then? Thomas Running Elk emerged from the shadows, moving with his characteristic silence. The network has to be destroyed. Every day we delay, more people suffer what those in Mercer's mind suffered. And revenge has nothing to do with it. Mason considered lying, then decided Thomas deserved truth. Everything to do with it. But Eleanor would say that's all right, as long as innocents are freed in the process. Thomas nodded slowly. My warriors want to come with you. This fight, it's ours too. Our people are among those enslaved. I was hoping you'd say that. The army won't like it, but I don't particularly care what the army likes anymore. They stood together in comfortable silence as the town began to wake. Somewhere a rooster crowed, and the normal sounds of life resuming filled the air. It seemed impossible that the world could just continue after Eleanor's death, but it did relentless and indifferent. Sarah appeared on the path carrying a leather satchel. "Provisions for your journey," she said, handing it to Mason. "And this." She pulled out a small leather journal, worn and water-stained. It was Eleanor's. She wrote in it every night at the mine, keeping record of what happened. "I thought you should have it." Mason's hands trembled as he took the journal. He opened it randomly, saw Eleanor's neat handwriting. "The children sang today, despite everything. Mercer can chain their bodies, but not their spirits. This gives me hope." "I can't," he said, trying to hand it back. "You must," Sarah insisted. "She wrote about you in the later entries, about forgiveness, about second chances. Read it when you're ready. Let her words guide you when the path gets dark." An hour later, Mason sat atop his horse at the edge of town, Thomas, and 15 Apache warriors beside him. Marshal Carter and 2 federal agents completing their group. The freed families had gathered to see them off, children waving, adults calling out blessings in multiple languages. Among them stood a familiar figure. Clayton Mercer, shackled and under guard, being loaded into a prison wagon for transport to federal custody. His eyes met Mason's across the distance, and for a moment the former Confederate colonel looked like what he truly was, an old man whose hatred had consumed everything he'd built. "Read," Mercer called out. "You think you've won? You think killing me changes anything?" Mason rode over to the wagon, looking down at the man who'd caused so much suffering. "You're not going to be killed, Mercer. You're going to rot in prison, forgotten, while the world you tried to preserve disappears completely. And every day you'll know that the people you enslaved are free-building lives, raising children who will never know chains. The South will rise again." Mercer spat. "You can't kill an idea." "No," Mason agreed. "But you can prove it wrong. Every freed slave who becomes a teacher, a business owner, a parent raising free children, they're the proof that your idea was always a lie." He turned his horse away, but Mercer's voice followed him. "She died for nothing, Reed. That girl's death changed nothing." Mason stopped, but didn't turn around. "Her name was Eleanor Hayes. She was the daughter of Clara Hayes, who died at Willow Creek because of men like you and mistakes by men like me. And her death changed everything, Mercer. It changed me. It changed this town. It changed the 187 people you enslaved. That's her victory and your defeat." He spurred his horse forward, leaving Mercer to his fate, and led his small force into the desert toward Phoenix and the larger war waiting there. The first target was a silver mine operation near Tombstone, run by a former Confederate major named Josiah Crenshaw. According to the intelligence Carter had gathered from Mercer's documents, Crenshaw held over 200 people in conditions even worse than Mercer's mine. No children, though. Crenshaw simply worked his slaves to death and replaced them with fresh captures. They made camp that first night near a hidden spring Thomas knew, and Mason finally opened Eleanor's journal. By firelight, he read her words, hearing her voice in every line. Day 43. A new child born today. The mother begged Mercer to let her keep it promised to work twice as hard. He laughed and said the baby would earn its keep soon enough. I wanted to kill him in that moment. Is it wrong to feel such hatred? Mother would say yes, but Mother never saw what I've seen. Day 98. Mason Reed is real. The hermit soldier the Apache speak of in whispers. I'm going to find him when I escape. Something tells me he needs saving as much as we do. Day 131. The teacher Sarah reminds me of Mother. She has that same quiet strength, that refusal to let circumstances break her spirit. We're planning something. If you're reading this and we're dead, know that we tried. Day 145, I escaped. I'm wounded, bleeding, but I have the proof. If I die, whoever finds this, please get the ledger page to someone who can act on it. These people deserve justice. They deserve freedom. They deserve to be remembered as more than numbers in Mercer's books. The final entry was dated the day before she met Mason. Day 146. I can see lights ahead. A cabin. I'm going to ask for help. I'm frightened, but also hopeful. Mother always said angels come in unexpected forms. Perhaps this hermit soldier is mine. If this is my last entry, know that I regret nothing except not acting sooner. The children in that mine deserve whatever sacrifice is required. May God forgive us all for what we've done and failed to do. Mason closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. Around the fire, Thomas and his warriors maintained respectful silence, understanding grief needed no translation. Carter approached, offering a flask. Whiskey. Sometimes it helps. Nothing helps, Mason said, but took a drink anyway. The burn felt appropriate, matching the ache in his chest. I've been thinking about what Mercer said, Carter ventured. About ideas not dying. He's right. That's why we have to do more than just free slaves. We have to destroy the foundation of the idea itself. How? Mason stared into the fire, seeing Eleanor's face in the flames. Education, prosperity, proof that former slaves can succeed when given the chance. Every success story is a nail in the coffin of Mercer's ideology. That's a long war. The only kind worth fighting. They reached the outskirts of Tombstone 3 days later. Crenshaw's operation was more military than Mercer's had been: guard towers, fortified positions, even a small cannon overlooking the main approach. Mason studied it through field glasses, his tactical mind analyzing weaknesses. They're paranoid, Thomas observed, all that defense against external attack. But vulnerable from within, Mason noted. Look at the slave quarters, minimal guards. They're so focused on keeping people out, they've neglected keeping people in. Because escape means death in the desert, Carter said. Where would they go? To us, Mason replied. If we could get word to them, coordinate an internal uprising with an external assault. How do we get word to them? Thomas smiled. My people have been trading with slaves in secret for years. Supplies for information. There's a woman inside Maria Sandoval. She's been organizing resistance for months, waiting for an opportunity. Can you reach her? Tonight, when they move the work crews to the mine. The plan came together quickly. Thomas's warriors would infiltrate the slave quarters, arm the prisoners with stolen weapons. At dawn, when the guards were changing shifts, the uprising would begin from within, while Mason led the federal forces in a frontal assault. It's risky, Carter said. If they detect us early, it'll be a massacre. Everything's risky, Mason replied. But these people have been waiting for hope. We're going to give it to them. That night, as Thomas's warriors slipped into the darkness, Mason sat writing a letter to Sarah. If he died tomorrow, he wanted someone to know what had become of him. Sarah, by the time you read this, will have either freed 200 souls or died trying. Either way, know that Eleanor's sacrifice meant something. Every person we free carries her spirit forward. Take care of the school. Teach the children not just to read and write, but to think, to question, to refuse the chains others would place on their minds. If I don't return, know that I finally found my purpose, my redemption in the cause she died for. Tell the children about her. Tell them about all of this. Let history remember the brave, not just the powerful. Dawn came blood red over the desert mountains. Mason watched the guard towers through his field glasses, waiting for the signal. The morning shift was arriving, tired men replacing tired men. That vulnerable moment when vigilance dropped. A flame appeared in the slave quarters. Then another. Then dozens torches grabbed from wall sconces turned into weapons. The uprising had begun. Now, Mason shouted and led the charge. The federal agents and Apache warriors swept toward the compound's main gate. The cannon boomed, but the shot went wide, the gunner panicking. Return fire from Thomas's warriors eliminated the cannon crew before they could reload. The gates burst open from inside, freed slaves pouring out, while others fought the guards with mining tools, chains, anything they could find. Mason saw Maria Sandoval, a woman of perhaps 40, leading a group of miners in an assault on the guard barracks. She fought with the fury of someone who'd waited too long for this moment. Crenshaw himself appeared on the compound's main building, rifle in aim, shooting at the escaping slaves. Mason tracked him, fired, and watched the former major spin and fall, not dead but wounded down. The battle was brutal but brief. Outnumbered and attacked from both sides, Crenshaw's guards surrendered or fled within an hour. Mason found himself in the compound's courtyard, surrounded by freed slaves who looked at him with expressions he recognized: that disbelief, that freedom had actually come. "You're free," he told them in Spanish and English. "Free to go where you choose, be what you choose." An old man bent from years of labor stepped forward. "Who are you?" "Someone who should have come sooner," Mason replied. "But we're here now and there are more operations to shut down. Some of you might want to help with that." Maria Sandoval approached, blood on her face, but standing tall. I know where 3 other operations are. Information we've gathered over the years, hoping someone would eventually come. Then you're our guide, Mason said. If you're willing. I've been willing since the day they brought me here in chains, senor. They spent 3 days in Tombstone organizing the freed slaves, arranging transportation for those who wanted to leave, employment for those who wanted to stay. The local newspaper ran headlines about the raid, and public opinion began to shift. Slavery wasn't gone after all, just hidden, and good people were appalled. Mason stood in Crenshaw's office going through documents with Carter when Thomas entered with news. Scouts report movement to the south. 3 operations are mobilizing, combining forces. They know we're coming. How many men? Maybe 300. Armed, fortified. They're making a stand at the Garrison Ranch. Carter whistled low. That's a small army. We can't take that with our current force. No, Mason agreed. But we don't have to take it alone. He pulled out maps, began planning. Send word to every freed slave, every sympathetic rancher, every person of conscience. Tell them the time has come to choose sides. The Shadow Confederacy makes its stand at Garrison Ranch. So do we. Word spread across the territory like wildfire. The freed slaves from Mercer's mine, led by Sarah and the children who could travel. Apache war bands who'd lost people to the slavers. Mexican families who'd seen relatives disappear. Union veterans who'd thought the war was over. Even Confederate veterans who'd kept their honor and were disgusted by what their former comrades had become. They gathered at a ranch 20 miles from Garrison, a motley army united only by their opposition to slavery. Mason stood before them, seeing Eleanor in every determined face. I won't lie to you, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. We're outnumbered. They're fortified. Some of us won't survive tomorrow, but inside that ranch are 500 enslaved souls waiting for freedom. Children who've never known anything but chains. Families torn apart by greed and hatred. We can end it tomorrow. All of it. The Shadow Confederacy dies at Garrison Ranch one way or another. An old Confederate veteran still wearing his gray coat stepped forward. I fought for the South because I believed in states' rights and honor in home, but this isn't what we fought for. This is a perversion of everything decent. I stand with you, Captain Reed. Others echoed the sentiment. By nightfall, Mason commanded nearly 500 fighters, poorly armed but highly motivated. He divided them into groups, each with specific objectives. The main assault would be a distraction, while smaller forces led by Thomas and Maria would infiltrate and free the slaves, turning Garrison's own workforce against them. That night, Mason walked among the camps, checking preparations, offering encouragement. He found Sarah tending to wounded from previous battles. You shouldn't be here, he said. Neither should you. We're neither of us fighters by nature, Mason. But sometimes peace requires war first. Eleanor would hate this. All these people risking their lives. No, Sarah corrected gently. She'd understand it. She'd probably be leading the charge herself. Near midnight, a rider arrived with unexpected news. Federal troops from Fort Huachuca were marching to support them. The president himself had authorized military action against the Shadow Confederacy. They would arrive by noon tomorrow. We could wait, Carter suggested. Let the army handle it. Mason shook his head. By noon, those slaves could be dead. Garrison knows he's trapped. He might decide to eliminate witnesses. Then we go at dawn as planned. We go at dawn, but dawn brought an unexpected development. A rider under a white flag approached from Garrison Ranch. The message was simple. Garrison wanted to negotiate. Mason met him in neutral ground, accompanied by Carter and Thomas. Colonel William Garrison was everything Mason had expected. Tall, rigid, scarred from numerous battles, eyes cold as winter stone. Reed, Garrison said without preamble, you've caused considerable disruption to legitimate business operations. I freed slaves from illegal imprisonment. Slaves. Garrison spoke the word like it tasted bitter. The war ended 20 years ago, but you're still fighting it. So are you, apparently. Garrison's jaw tightened. What we've built here is about survival, Captain. About preserving a way of life that worked for centuries. A way of life built on human misery. Built on order. On everyone knowing their place. The chaos you're creating will destroy this territory. Mason thought of Eleanor, of her fierce determination to free those children. Some things deserve to be destroyed, Colonel. Your Shadow Confederacy is one of them. And if I surrender, if I free the workers and turn myself in, then you live to stand trial. Your men are granted amnesty if they lay down arms immediately." Garrison was silent for a long moment. "And if I refuse?" "Then in 6 hours, federal troops arrive. Your compound is surrounded by people who have every reason to want you dead, and I personally will ensure that your Shadow Confederacy is not just defeated, but obliterated from history." "You're not a killer, Reed. I've read your record. Bleeding Heart who tried to save enemies at Willow Creek. That was before I watched Eleanor Hayes die. Before I saw what you and Mercer and the others have done. I'm offering you one chance at surrender, Colonel. Take it or leave it." Garrison turned to look back at his ranch smoke rising from morning fires. "I have 500 workers, Reed. You call them slaves. I call them laborers. Either way, they're fed, housed, given purpose. You free them. Where do they go? What do they do? You're condemning them to poverty and uncertainty." "I'm giving them choice," Mason replied. "The right to succeed or fail on their own terms. The dignity of being human rather than property. Dignity doesn't feed families. Neither does slavery. It just feeds masters." They stared at each other across 20 years of war and ideology. Finally, Garrison spoke. "I'll need guarantees. Written guarantees of amnesty for my men's safe passage for those who choose to leave. You'll get them, but the slaves are freed immediately. No conditions, no delays. And if they choose to stay and work for wages, that's their choice to make, but it will be a real choice with real wages and the freedom to leave whenever they want." Garrison extended his hand. "You have your surrender, Captain Reed. May God forgive us both for what we've done." Mason didn't shake the offered hand. "God's forgiveness isn't mine to grant, Colonel. Ask it from the people you've enslaved." The liberation of Garrison Ranch was surreal. No battle, no bloodshed, just the quiet opening of gates and removal of chains. 500 people blinking in the morning sun trying to understand that they were free. Some cried, others stood in shocked silence. Children clung to parents they'd been separated from for years. Mason watched from a hill as the federal troops arrived to find the situation already resolved. The Shadow Confederacy's leadership was in custody, their operations shut down, their slaves freed. It had taken less than 2 weeks since Eleanor's death, but it felt like a lifetime. Maria Sandoval found him there as the sun reached its zenith. "They're asking for you, Captain. The freed people want to thank you. They don't owe me thanks. If anything, I owe them apologies for taking so long to act. Come anyway. Let them see the face of someone who cared enough to fight for them." Mason walked among the freed slaves, accepting their gratitude, while feeling the weight of Eleanor's absence. She should have been here to see this, to witness the fruition of her sacrifice. A young girl, perhaps 7 years old, tugged at his coat. "Senor, are you the soldier who saved us?" Mason knelt to her level. "A lot of people saved you. I just helped a little. My mama says an angel sent you. A lady angel who died so we could be free." "Your mama's right," Mason said, his voice thick. "Her name was Eleanor. Remember that name." As the sun set over Garrison Ranch, Mason stood with Sarah Thomas and Carter watching as former slaves made choices about their futures. Some would leave immediately, others would stay to work for wages, all would carry the story of their liberation forward. "What now?" Sarah asked. "There are still other operations out there." "The federal government will handle them," Carter said. "This has become a national priority. The president is sending a full commission to investigate and prosecute." "And you?" Sarah asked Mason. "What will you do?" Mason pulled out Eleanor's journal, held it close. "I'm going back to Prescott. Going to help build that school we talked about. Going to make sure these children and all the others learn to read, write, and think for themselves. No more fighting. A different kind of fighting, the kind Eleanor believed in. Fighting ignorance, fighting hatred with education and opportunity." Thomas clasped his shoulder. "The Apache will remember what you've done. Our people's working together. It's a good start." "Just a start," Mason agreed. "The real work is what comes next." They began the journey back to Prescott the next morning, accompanying a wagon train of freed families who'd chosen to settle there. Mason rode ahead scouting the trail, but his mind was on the future. The school Sarah would build the children who would learn the slow transformation of a territory from a place of hidden slavery to something better. As they crested the final ridge before Prescott Mason saw the town spread below, and there on a small hill, the cemetery where Eleanor lay. He broke from the group, rode to her grave, and dismounted. Fresh flowers lay on the mound, desert roses someone had placed that morning. The wooden marker had been replaced with stone, engraved with her name and dates, and below that, a single line, she lit the flame of freedom. "We did it," Mason said quietly. "All of them free. The Shadow Confederacy broken. Your sacrifice meant something, Eleanor. It meant everything." The wind stirred, warm and gentle, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Mason pulled out her journal, read again her final entry about angels in unexpected forms. She'd thought he might be hers, but she'd been wrong. She'd been his angel, showing him the way back from 20 years of guilt and isolation to purpose and connection. Sarah found him there as the sun set. "The families are settling in. The school construction starts tomorrow. The whole town's contributing lumber labor money, even people who opposed us before. Eleanor would be proud. She is proud wherever she is." Sarah stood beside him, both of them looking at the grave that had become a shrine to courage. "Mason, there's something else. A letter came while you were gone, from Washington." Mason took the envelope, recognized the presidential seal. Inside a commendation for his service, a full pardon for any actions taken during the Liberation Campaign, and an offer to head a new federal department dedicated to finding and freeing enslaved people throughout the territories. "Will you accept?" Sarah asked. Mason thought of Eleanor's words about not letting her death break him, about living for both of them. "No. My war's over. My place is here building something instead of destroying it. Teaching children that Eleanor died to free. That's my mission now." As they walked back toward town, the first stars appearing in the desert sky, Mason felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years, peace. Not complete, perhaps never complete, but enough. The ghosts of Willow Creek were still there, would always be there, but they were quieter now, balanced by the lives saved, the freedom won. Eleanor Hayes had been dead 2 weeks, but her legacy would live for generations in every child who learned to read, in the school built with her sacrifice, in every former slave who found dignity and freedom, in every person who chose courage over comfort when faced with injustice. The transformation of Arizona Territory had begun with a desperate woman clutching a white cloth, begging for help from a broken soldier hiding from the world. It would continue with education opportunity and the slow, difficult work of building a society where Eleanor's dream that all people could be free might finally become reality. Mason Reed had found his redemption not in grand gestures or military victories, but in the simple act of carrying forward the flame that Eleanor Hayes had lit with her courage, maintained with her sacrifice, and passed to him with her dying breath. The work would be long, the progress slow, the setbacks numerous. But as Mason looked at the town below, already changing, already growing, he knew that Eleanor had been right. Sometimes you had to risk everything to change anything, and sometimes, just sometimes, the risk was worth it.